Thank you, everyone. I see that people are still joining, but we can start. Welcome to 24/7 Carbon-Free Energy Compact workshop. My name is Maja Gršić. I'm a Programs Associate at SE for All, and I'll be your host today. Before we start, just a few housekeeping rules. Please post any questions that you might have for our presenters in the chat, and later during the Q&A session, we'll try to reply to all of them. Please keep your microphones on mute so that there is no background noise, and we are recording this session. And after it, we are going to share with you all the slides that you will see. I will now pass the microphone to Ms. Madalena Kalelucas, who is from Corporate Sustainability of EDP and Dias de Portugal, who will deliver opening remarks. Madalena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maya, and good morning, good afternoon to all. So I have to share that I've been working on energy, climate change, and sustainable development matters for the past almost 2 decades as a lawyer in the public sector and in EDP, where I'm leading the international policy and stakeholder on sustainability. And these issues have been super interesting and super challenging always, but never before have they been so relevant as they are now. So EDP is a forward-looking electricity utility that has a robust sustainability strategy that's completely linked to the business strategy. With about 9 million customers, we have grown in the past 4 decades from being a local Portuguese company into a green energy major that's at the forefront of the energy transition. We are now in 22 countries and 4 continents, and we have 74% of our energy being today produced by renewable sources. So we recently reviewed our ambition and our targets, and those are reflected in our individual energy compact that was presented at the high-level dialogue on energy. And we committed to an additional investment of 24 billion euros towards the energy transition by 2025, and to phase out coal and become coal-free by 2025, while being an active shaper of the green future of the regions that are affected by the coal phase-out policies. By 2030, we will be full renewables, 100% renewable-based generation. And by 2030 as well, we will be carbon neutral. We will continue to invest further in the access to energy projects where they are most needed. So we know that energy underpins our modern world, and its development is the first step towards a better health, better education, and economic growth. And while we're facing this climate emergency, we need to rethink, and fast, how do we power our world? How do we turn a fossil fuel dependent economy into a cleaner, affordable economy, one that continues to grow and promote development, that is based on ethics, human rights, that protects biodiversity? So the momentum behind energy transition, and in particular electrification, is such that it has become a defining topic across the entire industry and beyond. So just to remind you of some quick number, the IEA Net Zero report points out a scenario for net zero foresees that 2/3 of the energy needs by 2050 will come from renewables, compared to 12% today, while fossil fuels will decrease from 78% to 23%, half of the latter combined with CCUS technologies. So just today, also, the European Commission presented the measures regarding the energy prices spike, and the clean energy transition is the best insurance, the Commission says, against the price shocks in the future, and it needs to be accelerated. So it's very clear, and for us, it's very clear that this paradigm shift in the energy system towards net zero societies, towards achieving the 2030 UN agenda, require global action, require the involvement and the coordination effort between countries, cities, private sector, academia, civil society. And this should be supported by increased technological innovation and significant policy reform. So in this context, for EDP, it is very, very important that we participate in the major international organizations that are working with sustainability, as in the case of C4All. This really helps us advance and prepare our corporate strategies in these topics. But it's also very important that we participate actively in the international forums that are most relevant for this transition to take place, being it high-level dialogues as the one so important that we had on energy, very recent, being it debates, initiatives, campaigns. In these forums, as COP25, the business community can not only advocate for adequate policies to advance investment in these areas, but it can help build the confidence among governments. It can encourage them to raise their own level of ambition that we so much need, and leverage the multi-stakeholder partnerships, policies, and financing that are needed to actively deliver progress. So we see this 24/7 compact as one of these partnerships. Following the preparation of our own individual compact, we were presented, as you are being today, with the possibility of joining forces with Google and other very relevant entities with the support of UN Energy and C4All. This compact stands for concerted and targeted effort by different stakeholders to develop and scale the energy policies, technologies, procurement practices, and solutions to transform the broader energy ecosystem and to enable rapid and cost-effective achievement of 24/7 carbon-free energy for all. This is basically our mission, what we aim at, and it covers what each signatory of 24/7, irrespectively of their transition level, can bring. So yes, your organization can make a difference here. And you will hear the explanation of the compact, and I don't want to spoil it, but I would like to mention this. Signatories commit to advance procurement practices, market mechanisms, policies, technologies, and energy data and transparency that is needed to enable the achievement of 24/7 energy, carbon-free energy. This commitment will be translated into a business strategy, into a revised set of policies, of procedures, those that are not already in place, and that makes a change. It goes beyond top-down, bottom-up approaches. The ability to make partnerships to drive societal changes drives from the heart of your organization and your vision. And these sort of strategies, for us at TDP, we see them. They go beyond just aligning with climate science and energy goals. They are important drivers of additional innovation, policy, partnerships, jobs, and most of all, they provide a confidence to our stakeholders that our outlook aligns with theirs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madalena, for the opening remarks. I will now pass the microphone to Mr. George Hampton, who is the Senior Advisor to the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy and CEO of SC4All. George?
Yeah, thank you very much, Maya, and a huge thank you to Madalena as well. I think there was an excellent way to start this particular workshop with what I think is a very inspiring example that EDP has provided, and the background as well to that and that decision making. And I know we'll come back to the details of the 24/7 compact, and Caroline will take us through that in a second. But yeah, it's a great way to start and a really good example of exactly what can be done and the potential of this compact. So just to briefly take you through some of the more general background to energy compacts and the high-level dialogue that Madalena was mentioning. So back now a couple of weeks ago on the 24th of September 2021, thank you, Maya. Next slide, please. The UN Secretary General was given a mandate by the General Assembly two and a bit years ago to host a meeting on energy. This was the high-level dialogue on energy. It was the first General Assembly, first UN mandated meeting, or rather summit on energy, so a leaders level meeting in 40 years. Now, 40 years ago, the world faced a crisis. Back then it was the oil crisis in the early 1980s, and that prompted the UN to push to meet. Now and in the lead up to this meeting, we face at least two crises on energy. One around climate change and energy's role in emissions, and the second very dramatically around energy access, and in particular the almost 800 million people who lack access to electricity, along with the billions who lack access to clean cooking sources. And overall, part of the rationale for the high-level dialogue and for the energy compacts as well, which we'll turn to in a second, is just how off track we are from achieving our global goals on energy. So in particular, the global goals, when I refer to those, I'm talking about Sustainable Development Goal number 7. So this is the set of global goals agreed by the international community back in 2015. And then also the Paris Agreement, which also obviously has a big impact on energy. And on both those fronts, SDG 7 includes parts I've already mentioned, so relevant sub-goals on energy access, energy efficiency, and renewable energy, and then obviously Paris, which is more focused on emissions through the nationally determined contributions process. But on both fronts, the response and the impact so far has been largely insufficient. It's been fragmented, and honestly as well has lacked some accountability. So the intention of the energy compacts is intended to bring together in a platform more voluntary actions, more action on energy, and to try and link better to our future goals. Next slide. So what are energy compacts? Well, kind of in the DNA of the energy compacts is both inclusivity and flexibility. And when I say inclusivity, I mean compacts can come from any number of different stakeholders. So today we've had Magdalena come on and speak from the perspective of a private sector organization, a business, and what role they can play. At the summit, and we'll review the outcomes in a second, we had around 160 compacts come from all sorts of stakeholders, including from 35 countries, but as well as civil society, youth groups, international organizations such as the World Bank. But part of the philosophy of the energy compacts is that we all have a role to play in achieving SDG 7, and that everyone inside the international system, and that's everyone, has a role to achieve the goals under Sustainable Development Goal number 7, as well as the Paris Agreement. The second thing is this idea of flexibility. So you'll see under the what some examples, very broad examples of kind of categories of where action might come from for these voluntary commitments. But these voluntary commitments can really be from any front. They can also be existing actions being ramped up, or new ambition or raised ambition being applied to those actions. They can be new actions as well. They could be domestically based or internationally based. There's really no kind of limit as to what exactly they could be. And we'll come back a little bit later on the presentation as to really what sort of criteria we're seeking, but they're very broad. And finally, on that sort of how box on the right-hand side, so just to note that really there is an intention that these actions are aligned and are in line with other existing actions. So particularly to look at the nationally determined contributions there, the NDCs. We've worked closely with our colleagues from COP and from the COP presidency in the UK to make sure that the energy compacts are mutually reinforcing of NDCs. And so that's an important point as well. Next slide, Maya. Thanks. So in the lead up to the high-level dialogue, we had around about 30 countries, global theme champions, support and in sort of a leadership role, the process towards both the high-level dialogue and the energy compacts. Many of those countries committed to energy compacts as well. And then on the right-hand side there, we have a large number of international organizations, UN organizations that supported the process too. And again, many of those within the UN family also committed to energy compacts. But overall, it gives you a sense of some of the support the process had. Next slide. So this slide gives you a bit of a sense of some of the results of the high-level dialogue, in particular of the energy compacts. The sort of headline is that overall we had around $400 billion in new finance and investment committed by government and private sector. Beyond that, we had a substantial amount more in leveraged or catalytic finance committed from the private sector as well. And then we had a variety of compacts, as I mentioned, from other stakeholders. This included some, that made significant commitments in regard to, additional gigawatts of renewable energy, or significant commitments regarding energy efficiency and savings that the countries would make, or even going to electric vehicles. But again, one of the important points that we tried to, put into the DNA of the compacts, and this goes to that kind of flexibility and inclusivity idea, is that we were prepared to have commitments from everybody, and those commitments could be equally an end point or a starting point. So countries in particular could be coming to the compacts process, not necessarily knowing everything they needed to do to 2030, but we thought it was more important for them to be making that commitment to begin with and building up from that commitment. We'll come back to that again, but that's part of the philosophy, is this idea of raising ambition and reviewing and potentially renewing your commitments in energy compacts as things progress. Then on the right-hand side, we have another very exciting compact that was launched during the high-level dialogue, which is the 24/7 carbon-free energy compact, which was led by Google, and we've got a number of partners up there. Those were the partners, the initial signatories from the launch at the high-level dialogue, and we'll be hearing in more detail about the partnership and about what Google's intending, along with partners as well, in a second. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit more of a specific idea of some of the commitments that you could be made in an energy compact. So again, there's a lot of flexibility here, and as you'll see, different stakeholders can make different types of commitments depending on the business they're in, or the industry they're in, or potentially the stakeholders they represent, or the commitments they can make at this current time. But stakeholders, and you'll see this on the right, and again, this goes to the presentation that we'll get in a second, can also come together to make compact commitments around kind of cross-cutting issues, or issues where the coming together of stakeholders may allow us to accelerate progress even more. And again, this carbon-free energy compact, based on the 24/7 principles, is really a good example of exactly what a multi-stakeholder compact can look like and what it can do. Next slide. So the process to get to an energy compact is relatively simple. So essentially, entities submit a compact to us, and when I say us, I'm really meaning a group called UN Energy, which is the UN's interagency body on energy issues. There's no single body. There is a coordination mechanism, which UN Energy is. So UN Energy experts assess these compacts, and we went through this process, in particular in the lead up to the summit, where we fed back to stakeholders based on a set of guiding principles that we'll come to in a second, and then the compacts are registered. And then down the right-hand side, there is just really a note on what I mentioned before, which is that we don't see ambition as being something that stands still, and that we see ambition building to 2030. And it's again a really important point. As technology develops, as people get more FDI or more investments or support from others, and focus more on exactly what 2030 might look like, we expect plans to be updated and people to move forward with their compacts. Next slide. So very briefly now, because you've heard, I'm sure, way too much of me, is just to say that the principles under which these compacts are assessed. So there's a few very obvious things here if you're familiar with kind of these international agendas. So obviously in line with Sustainable Development Goal agenda, including the targets of SDG 7, in line with the Paris Agreement and net zero by 2050. And then this sort of synergies point going to other SDGs as well. And the two other points to make is just really around the idea of stepping up ambition and accelerating action. So again, going to this idea of raising ambition to 2030. And then secondly, we really ideally are looking for energy compacts to include smart targets, measures that are feasible and sound and verifiable, that include indicators and baselines and targets, etc. Next slide. So finally, the only other thing to mention is that the intention of the energy compacts, in particular the energy compacts from member states, from member states of the UN, from countries, is to include requests for support. So this is an important principle. All compacts should sort of really itemize what you need to succeed, and kind of this goes to the how of the energy compacts. But particularly for member states, we want to try and create a matchmaking scenario where we can see the opportunities that exist clearly in member state compacts, and we look to bring in other partners, particularly partners who have committed to energy compacts, whether they're from the private sector, whether they're from international financial institutions or other bilateral donors, and seek to matchmake them and to have those opportunities come alive. So that's probably more than enough from me. So I think next slide, and I'll pass back over to you, Maya, and I think Caroline is up next.
Thank you, George. As George said, we'll now hear the presentation from Ms. Caroline Gollin, who is the Global Head of Energy Markets and Policy at Google. Caroline?
Hello, good morning, or good afternoon for most of you, I think. Thank you for having me. I want to apologize that I have a little bit of a cold. I actually think it's allergies, but so if you can't hear me because I sound a little groggy, just let me know and I'll try to speak up. I want to start off by just sort of echoing the comments that were made previously, and I was reflecting also on sort of my own journey, in the clean energy and sustainability space, and remembering about a decade ago when I was working on my dissertation at Georgia Tech here in the United States. And the conversation was only about, can we make solar cheap enough and quick enough in the next 20 years? And that was where the scientific community was at. That's kind of where the policy and the economic community was at. And it was really singularly focused, and it was all the eggs were sort of in one basket. And what I would say is that what I've seen over the past decade is this wonderful evolution of actors who have recognized that it's so much more than one or two technologies, that it's really about creating an entirely new ecosystem, creating an entire new economy around the transition to clean energy, that there's so many more innovations in hardware and in software, and policies and market structures that need to happen, that are critical to happen. And so there's so much more to do, and that gives all of us here so much more agency in that transition. And I'm really just encouraged by that daily. I see the new opportunities and the new places where, everyone from farmers to, I think you mentioned youth groups, to car manufacturers, to business owners, small business owners, to heads of state have a role to play here. And I think that that's sort of the theme in this, and that's definitely at the core of 24/7, is recognizing that it's bigger, it's more inclusive, and it's urgent, and so I'm just I was just really encouraged by the remarks earlier today or earlier this morning, and I just want to sort of reinstate those before we go on, so you all see that for Google, our clean energy story has really sort of mirrored the evolution of the industry. We were carbon neutral, and then we were the first corporation to achieve 100% renewable energy in our procurement. And now we've moved on to what we really believe is the last ambition for our operations, which is to operate every day, every hour, 24/7 on carbon-free energy. And so I want to go through with you all what that actually means, so you have a really strong understanding of what 24/7 carbon-free energy means, and then what it means in the broader ecosystem, and why we think the compact is a really wonderful forcing mechanism and sort of collective umbrella, so that we can all start working together to what we think is this critical goal of a zero carbon grid. So with that, I will kick it off, and we can go sort of to the first slide. So what is 24/7 carbon-free energy? And I think this is probably the most critical thing for everyone to come away with today, outside of understanding the compact process, is to really understand what we mean by this, because it really shifts everyone's thinking. So for us, we define 24/7 carbon-free energy is in that every kilowatt of electricity consumption is met with carbon-free electricity sources. And that's every hour of every day, everywhere. And that is different from other goals that have been set out in the ecosystem and other procurement goals, and very different from other goals we have made, which were historically, net zero and then 100% renewable. And for us, we see 24/7 CFE as both the end state. We want to fully decarbonize the electricity system, but more importantly, which I think we can all agree to, we all want to completely decarbonize the electricity system. That's the goal. But more importantly, it's the approach. And it's the approach that actually matters. And what we have learned in our experiences as a leader in this industry is that getting the goal right matters, and getting collective focus on the right goal matters. And it matters for a number of reasons, but it matters right now, most critically, because we don't really have time to do anything else but focus on where we actually want to be. And we don't have time for any interim solutions anymore. We actually just need to drive the grid to zero. So the way that we like to explain this is typically in an example that helps everyone understand why 24/7 is different than the goal of 100% renewable, which is a leading objective out there. So 24/7 is inclusive of renewable energy. All renewable energy is carbon-free energy, but not all carbon-free energy is renewable energy. And when we talk about 24/7 carbon-free, we're also talking about the other enabling technologies that get us there: the grid technologies, the software technologies, the market technologies that we're all going to need, the data technologies that we're all going to need to get the grid to zero. Below on this slide, what you see is a heat map. And this is a heat map of our hourly energy use or electricity use at one of our largest data centers in Iowa, in the United States. This was a flagship data center for us. It's one of our largest data centers. And it was one of the first data centers that we were able to take to 100% renewable. And like every other actor in this space, for us, 100% renewable meant that we were globally matching our entire load, our entire demand, with an equal amount of renewable energy. And we were matching that globally, which meant that if we didn't have jurisdiction or the ability to procure renewable resources where we operated, we just went to a market where we did, and we procured resources there. But we made sure that our global footprint in demand matched our global footprint in supply of renewable energy. So what that ended up doing, which the great part of that was that it ended up driving the cost of wind and solar down in many markets, which we are proud of that. And I think many of the buyers and many of the suppliers in this space are proud that we were able to do that, because now wind and solar are cheap, they are accessible, and they are growing on the grid. But what that didn't do was mean that any of the fossil fuel technologies that were on the grid that we operated on were taken off. It also didn't mean that it meant that in many hours of the day, we weren't operating on carbon-free energy. And so this heat map here shows you what the green is our carbon-free electricity supply. And the dark is where we have gaps and where we're still operating on fossil fuels. And so for us, what it meant that we were not operating 100% on the resources that we want to be operating on. We were really just building onto the system, and we weren't able to actually get to this state where we were running on carbon-free energy or even 100% renewable energy. Because, as we all know, renewable energy is, dependent on time and space and the resource. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to flesh this out a little bit more. So over here on the right, you see a few more heat maps, right? And I want to get through this example so that I can move on to what it actually means, what we're gonna need to get to, our heat map where it's all green, where we're completely operating on carbon-free energy. In a similar exercise, we went out to market and we said, let's take the approach of 100% renewable. Let's say we are going out to our data, we're taking our data center load out, and we said, match our data center load with 100% solar, match it with 100% wind, and then go out to market and create a stack of power that stacks solar, wind, and storage to make sure that we are generating carbon-free energy to match our hourly demand on the grid. And so we did that exercise with a partner of ours, AES, who I'm not sure if they're on the call today, but we did this with AES last year. So they went out and they matched it for 100% solar. And what we found is that in that situation, we had only reduced 2.2 million tons of carbon, which is great, but we were only operating 65% of the time on carbon-free energy. The nature of the grid mix and the nature in which electrons flow, the rest of the time we were operating on fossil fuels. We went out with wind. Now, wind was a little better, 77% carbon-free energy, 3.3 million tons reduction in carbon. So that got us a little better. But then we went out and we said, no, focus on creating the power stack so that we can get as close to 100% as possible. So they layered solar, wind, and storage together, and we got to 91% carbon-free energy and 4.7 million tons of CO2. So this really, I think, illustrates the difference between going out and doing just a renewable matching overall and going out and really targeting that hourly need and what that actually does to the system. And this was sort of a proof test for us to go, okay, what we're running after is real. We know that this approach plays out in the market, and this is really where we need to head, right? And so when we think about carbon-free energy, why, when we think about that goal, why this over anything else? And number one, as we've seen, it's greater emissions. We fundamentally know that we need to be focusing on the grid and getting them to zero, and not looking at a global match, and not looking to do anything else other than make sure our footprint is as clean as possible. For us, it also reduces financial risks. What we've seen in our history is that we were overbuilding the system, and we were not focusing on how the grid can work long term. And what we were doing was not scalable. It was not scalable for every customer, right? And that runs financial risk. It runs grid risk. It runs resiliency risk. If you're not focusing on fixing the grid that you operate on and focusing on driving the grid that you operate on to zero, you are delaying the investments that need to be made to do that. And you are sort of delaying the focus on the grid. And you can end up overbuilding it in the wrong way. And so that has real financial risk. The last thing that, or the next thing that we really feel strongly about is that having a 24/7 carbon-free focus, if the goal is carbon-free, we have to drive innovation. We don't have all the technologies out there to have a carbon-free grid. We need to develop those. We don't have the market mechanisms out there right now to have a carbon-free grid. We do have the market mechanisms out there to be 100% renewable for a lot of buyers. We do. We don't have them for a carbon-free grid. We don't have the financial tools. We don't have the data yet to have a carbon-free grid. And if we focus on a carbon-free grid, we actually drive more innovation in the economy, more players, more actors. We need new ideas and we need more focus. And so for us, this ability as a tech company, Google as a tech company that sees ourselves as, you know, an integral part of the future economy, the idea of being able to drive greater innovation, drive greater job growth, drive greater economic boom, that was really, really enticing to us. And so that's something that we really wanted to focus on, was being able to spur more innovation in the economy, right? Oh, next slide. Sorry, we went back a slide. So I'll just go to the last one, the next slide, because this last point is where, oh, sorry, back one more. This last point is what is at the heart of it for me. And I think what is the heart of this compact is that right now, to get to a zero carbon grid, we have to fundamentally change policy. And if we don't fundamentally change the policies and the market structures which guide our economy, we will not get there. And the only way we're going to change policy is with collective focus, a collective goal, and collective action. And that's why this is the lens in which we all need to work through, is because we all need to be putting our efforts in changing policy. If you are focused on the grid that you operate on, you have to be focused on the policies that shape those grids. If your goal is getting to a zero carbon grid for your operations, you have to be focused on the policies that are going to determine what generation resources go on that grid, what investments are made. And right now, what we are seeing in the buyer community is that we need greater collective focus from buyers and from actors on the policy change. We need that advocacy, and we need to pressure, and we need to work together, and we need a seat at the table, right? And so that's a lot of the reason why we started this compact, is because at the heart of 24/7, it's a recognition that we need to fundamentally change policy and markets. And if we do not do that, we will not meet our goals. And so that's what's so exciting about the 24/7 carbon-free energy compact, is it's that call to arms, and it's that umbrella of which we can all work together to change those policies. So next slide. So how do we think we're going to do this? As I said before, we know we need to make progress and innovation in a number of areas, but we also know we need collective commitment from the stakeholders across the ecosystem. And for us, and we believe this list will grow as we get more diverse actors in on this with us. But for us, what we think we need is we need to, number one, reorient clean energy purchasing. And it needs to be focused not on a global match of renewable energy or a global match of net zero, but a zero of the grids that you operate on, hourly, every day of the year. We also need to create new products and new services. This is part of the innovation I was talking about. There is a whole world of opportunity that's out there if we drive towards it. We also need to develop and commercialize the advanced carbon-free energy and demand optimization technologies. It's not just about wind and solar. There are several other new technologies that we need to develop, including storage and many others. And we also need to develop the grid stabilizing technologies that make sure that we can integrate renewable energy and integrate intermittent technologies faster and cheaper and more resiliently. Then we need the policy shifts, right? I said this before, but this is critical. We need the policy shifts to enable the innovation. We need the policy shifts to enable the investment, and we need the policy shifts to accelerate this broader grid decarbonization. And so that looks like setting standards and targets. It also looks like fundamentally just investing in this new technology. It means stopping the investment in technologies that we know are not going to get us to a zero carbon grid and are going to be stranded assets and costly for customers across the board. And in addition to that, and this is one that is really, really fundamental, and that's why it gets its own bullet, is that we need the access to data. So just to give a little bit of an aside, when we set our 24/7 carbon-free energy goal, we took almost a year to analyze the grids that we operated on. And we knew that that wasn't something that was accessible to every customer. So as part of that, we developed a methodology paper. We actually released our own heat map. So for anyone who's interested in looking at those heat maps for the grid and understanding the carbon footprint of many of the grids out in largely Europe and the US right now, you can access our methodology paper and you can get access to those heat maps. You can begin to understand it. But we know that that's not scalable. It's not scalable for every entity to take a year to be and hire a slew of consultants to be able to do that. So we need to get greater access to data. We need to get greater access to the analytical tools, and we are committed to helping develop that. And that's something we're doing right now, and we want to continue to do. So for us, this is what 24/7 means, but for other actors, there will be other policy objectives that need to be here. There will be very clear, innovative objectives that need to be here. So next slide. So when we look at 24/7 and if we can all agree that we want a zero carbon grid, we can all recognize that we need to focus on the grids and drive the grids that we operate on to zero, that we recognize the need for this innovation, we recognize the need for this policy commitment. This is where the 24/7 Compact comes in. And for us, like I said before, it's the umbrella. It's the umbrella and it's the meeting place and it's the network by which we all are going to work together to drive collective change. I will say, and this has come up in our workshops before, people are saying, okay, what's next? I'm in on this compact, but what's next? And I want to say this is an invitation to everyone to be part of that, and that we hope to use, COP and meetings going forward to do this as a group, right? To do this together. We have our roadmap, we know where we're going, but we want to learn from others, and we want to figure out where are the policy solutions with others that we can drive change together. So this is really an invitation to be part of this and to help us all shape where we need to together. But to be part of it, we want everyone to adopt the compact, and we want everyone also to take in the journey, right? And so adopting the compact means commitments. It means that if you have the jurisdiction, you are going to adopt over time purchasing approaches that match hourly electricity demand on a local, regional electricity grids where your consumption occurs. If you have jurisdiction, we understand that there are a number of participants that may not have jurisdiction. We want to make sure that we're focusing on the policy changes, so you do. Supplier, we are developing the energy supply solutions that provide greater access to 24/7 CFE for consumers. If you are anyone, you have agency, you're publicly advocating and supporting energy policies that accelerate decarbonization, which I talked about a little bit before, but that really looks like market changes. That looks like direct investment in new tech. That looks like data access and transparency. And also, if you are an innovator or a technology provider, you're developing these new carbon-free hardware or software technologies. And we call that out because our experience has been, that is so critical, and we really want to make sure that lane accelerates. And then finally, we're advocating to support widespread access to the energy data that everyone needs. Then that's really the linchpin that's going to enable this shift. If we don't know what's happening on the grid, we can't fix it, right? And so, collectively together with pressure and will, I think we can get that data and get it accessible and transparent and usable in a way where every consumer feels empowered. So these are the commitments of the CFE Compact. We think that every actor has a different role to play. And so this, like I said, this is the umbrella. And from these commitments, we would encourage everyone here to sign their own compact to say, okay, I'm a supplier, or I'm an advocate, or I'm a policymaker. What is my role in driving the grid to zero carbon? And spelling that out so that you have agency and that you have a platform by which you're working under this critical movement. Next slide. So how do you do this? Well, it's pretty simple to join the 24/7 Carbon-Free Energy Compact. It's really an acceptance of these principles, and we can work through SE for All to do this. Once you do that, we will say that we are going to be working with signatories at COP. We're hoping to host a few meetings, and those signatories will be broadcast at COP and get visibility there. And we hope to use COP to sort of drive more attention to this critical movement. To get visibility at COP, I will say though, we have sort of this due date of October 27th, so that SE for All is not too stressed out leading up to those final days, as I'm sure we all will be. And then we'd like you to, over time, it's not necessary to do it before COP, but we really do encourage signatories to develop their own compact. It really does help focus where you want to work and what your agency is. So I don't know if I've missed anything there. I'm sure someone will tell me if I have, but really it's about agreeing to these principles, seeing 24/7 as both the end goal and the lens in which we all need to collectively work, adopting the principles, and then figuring out what your own story is in this and what role you're going to play. Cataloging that in a way that gives it teeth. And then, after this, we hope to sort of collectively work together to figure our brains and our hearts and our muscle and our mouths to shape our global economy to achieve a carbon-free grid. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Caroline. This was very insightful. I will now open the floor to questions, so you can still address them in the chat, or you can use a raise hand function and I'll call your name and you can just ask like that. Anyone?
Everyone gets it. That was it. That was great. Everyone gets it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Maya, while people are putting in questions, feel free to get in touch with us. As Caroline said, SE for All is here to help. There's an email address there on that slide. We're there to assist people both with signing up to the CFE, but also and more generally signing up to energy compacts. So feel free to come into us via that email address. We're there to help.
Thank you, George. Alan asked, where and when will the meetings be at COP?
Yeah, good question, Alan. We are still sort of firming that up. We assume that they are going to be hybrid with the virtual option, because we know that it's a very difficult year. But that information will be distributed to the signatories before COP. I'm assuming the last couple of days of October as we firm it up. Google has space, which we can offer to SE for All. SE for All has space, and we'll work together to figure that out. And or if any other signatory has something they want to do with this, I really want to say that 24/7. Google didn't invent 24/7, and we don't want it to be the Google goal. We really are hoping to institutionalize this, as we think it is so critical. And so my hope in a year is that Google's barely even associated with 24/7, because it has become sort of the collective will of the energy ecosystem, and we're working from that point. So if there are other signatories that have something they would like to do, are interested in, or have an idea, I think bring that to SE for All and let's figure that out.
Thank you, Caroline. Grant asks, he says, we have corporate customers who may be interested to sign up. Can they sign up today?
Yes, of course. Right? I'm at this point speaking for SE for All. So I believe that's correct.
I provided an email address in the chat, energycompact@seforall.org. So please reach us for any questions and we'll follow up. Matt Hutchinson says, how would we track hourly data from DERs such as distributed solar?
So Matt, it somewhat depends on the grid that you operate on and what the granularity of the data is. For many grids in Europe and for a few in the US and very few in Asia, we can get that hourly generation curve on the grid because it's counted as part of the grid mix. You can single it out from a load profile. The problem is that in many grids you can't, and so we have to back into it through sort of an emissions data platform. We've been working with a few companies. Tomorrow is one of them that have that hourly grid data, and we're hoping to work with them further and work with a few other companies to really open access that data. But to make it really, to proliferate that, we really need to put pressure on our policymakers and make them understand that our energy use data is a fundamental right that we should have, and we should be able to use it and shape our own narrative going forward.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm just reading in the chat. Does anybody have any more questions? Going once, going twice. George, do you want to add something? Or Caroline, any closing remarks?
Well, I'll say this. I've stayed in this industry because every single year I've seen more people get it. I've seen more actors, more companies, more policymakers just get the critical need. And I really think we're at an inflection point where we all need to get it together. And I am really encouraged. And I think that there is so much we can do with a collective focus and a collective goal. I would never, ever, ever underestimate that power. And so I'm really excited by this. And I'm so thankful for SE for All for championing this and stewarding this. I'm so thankful for my partners at EDP who are just leading the way on the supplier side. And it's just really wonderful to see so many innovative actors working together. And I think we can grow this and we can push this in a way where in 10 years, we've seen the change, the critical change that we know we all need. So.
Thank you, Caroline. George, anything else?
Yeah, just to support Caroline's closing comments, and a huge thanks to her and Google and Magdalena, but also to everyone on the call today. As I say, we're there to help you out, but I think we also have taken this philosophy to the Energy Compacts where we know that everyone needs to work together to make this happen. And we really support everyone on this call joining up to the 24/7 CFE and joining up to Energy Compacts as well. It's not difficult to sign up. It may be difficult to meet the obligations and to really get in line, but that's why we're all on this call today. And we know that we need to meet this challenge. So we'd really strongly urge you to join, and it would be great to have you on board. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Caroline. Dear participants, we've come to the end of our presentations today. As I mentioned, I will share the slides that you've seen after the session with all of you. I hope that you enjoy that you have enjoyed the presentations, and I would like to thank again both George and Caroline for their time. It's really been a pleasure to host this. I hope that you also learned something and that we managed to inspire you. Thank you again, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.